Welcome to the Practice Impossible podcast, where your host, Jude Pierre, MD, also known as Coach JPMD, discusses medical practice topics that will guide you through the maze that is the business of medicine and teach you how to increase profits and help populations live long. Your mission, should you choose to accept, is to listen and be transformed. Now, here's your host, Coach JPMD.
Thank you for listening to the Practice Impossible podcast with your host, Coach JPMD. That's me. I hope that you all had a great Thanksgiving holiday week last week, and I know that I did, and I took some time off as well, do some home purging, and that's going well. So before we head into this episode, I wanted to remind you, my listeners, that I show physicians how to go from feeling overwhelmed about the practice and the business of medicine to confident while increasing their income in less than 90 days. If you're interested, click on the Calendly link at the bottom of this page or at the show notes and set up a call and you can learn more. So today's episode is a fun episode. It's one where I interview Dr. Jude Pierre. And no, I'm not interviewing myself. I'm actually interviewing Dr. Jude-Farley Pierre, who is a podiatrist and has really become, I shouldn't say become, he is a brother from another mother. And he discusses family, overcoming stress, and his podiatry practice. And it's an honor to have him on the Practice Impossible podcast. And this is actually fun that we're going to be able to memorialize our friendship through this conversation. And I know that you guys and gals are going to really enjoy this conversation. So here we go. So we're here with Jude Pierre. It's just funny saying that. And it's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast, the Practice Impossible podcast, Jude-Farley Pierre.
It's a pleasure.
So today we're going to talk about specialists. You're a specialist in medicine and you're a podiatrist in the Spring Hill area. And, before we even get into the practicing, we have to just clear the air out with the our origin story and how we met. And I don't know if you want me to start or you want to start.
Go for it. I'll just interject.
So I met Jude, in 2002? I had just moved to Spring Hill. I probably, 4 or 5 months into Spring Hill.
Same here.
And I got a phone call from my team member and she was like, Dr. Pierre, there's a Jude Pierre on the phone and he says he wants to speak to you. I'm like, what is this? Come on. What do you mean Jude Pierre? No, he says this is Dr. Jude Pierre wants to speak to you. So I said, okay, whatever. I get on the phone and you tell me, well, I just tried to apply for privileges at the hospital and they said, I have privileges. So tell me how that started. Like, what were you hadn't had privileges. And so you called or you went to the hospital. How'd that work?
So I moved in, I think May 2002. I started working with this podiatrist in Spring Hill. Of course, I was living in Palm Harbor. Uh-huh. So in the process of getting credentialed and getting on staff at some of the area hospitals, I don't know what happened, but somehow I don't remember applying for privileges at Oak Hill, but somehow they sent me a welcome package. So I'm like, why? Okay. And at the same time, there was an ad in the paper that said, welcome Dr. Jude Pierre to Spring Hill. I'm like, wow, this is really a small town. Coming from New York, of course, I'm thinking, wow, I must be really in the boonies because, man, you can't sneeze without someone saying, Gesundheit. So I was like, okay, well, it must be a small town thing. Whatever, I'll roll with it. So when I did go to the hospitals, I'm like, you have a mistake here. I'm not an MD, I'm a DPM. They're like, but that's not what your application says. I'm like, what application? So needless to say, I found out there was another Jude Pierre in the area. So I'm like, that's impossible. I mean, I'm from New York, from Brooklyn, where pretty much every Haitian person lives. And I come to like the most backwards corner of Florida to find another Jude Pierre. That doesn't make any sense.
In the same hospital system too.
Yeah, it made no sense whatsoever. So I'm like, no, there's no way. So I can't remember who the person was, but they gave me the number and said, you need to call and figure this out. So I said, all right. So I called the number and I was actually anxious because I'm thinking maybe it's a small mistake. Maybe it's just one accent away, just something different. And of course, the person who answered the phone said, Dr. Jude-Pierre's office. I'm like, huh? It's so weird to call and hearing your name being sent back to you. So I'm like, all right, well, I'd like to speak to Dr. Pierre because, I'm thinking it's got to be a joke. So, hey, I want to hear this from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And then that's where you picked up.
And then I think I told you need to come to the office. I think I remember saying, I said, you need to come to the office.
Absolutely.
And
I remember that conversation because just like, no, I have to see who you are because we just started talking like, okay, where are you from? New York. I'm like, where? Okay. And then found out you're from Queens, Laurelton area.
Yeah. I was born in Brooklyn. So you were living in Brooklyn.
I was living in Brooklyn.
And your parents moved to New York, I think around the same time that my parents moved to New York.
Probably.
From Haiti.
Yep. Let's see. I think they're from different parts of Haiti, which was because my dad's from up north. Ironically, he looks a lot more like your dad. They look like they could be brothers. Small stature, fair skin, balding. So that was kind of a shock. I remember at the end of the conversation, though, you said, all right, one more question. Is your wife named Christine? I was like, no, I'm not married. So I was like, okay, good. Because I think even you were like, yeah, this must be a Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and I actually think I asked you for your license. I said, let me see your license.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you said your dad's first name is my middle name.
That's absolutely correct.
So Antoine. Yep. So you could have easily been a Jude Antoine Pierre.
Absolutely.
So in my infinite wisdom, I said, you know what? You need to join us at Access. Because I was like, I have to say it was selfish on my part. I was like, we can do the marketing blitz on this. And Jude Pierre, your podiatrists and internists on the same block. So you ended up moving your office or joining us on the same street, actually right next door, 2 doors down from where my office was.
Yeah, a year later. We were actually pretty much next door. I think you were 5362 and I was 5374.
Yeah. It was great marketing. I mean, it caused mass confusion and cross promotion.
The hospital was the worst because I think there were times when you were on call and you had patients sitting in the hospital for at least 3 or 4 days before you even found out because they would admit them under my name.
Oh. I don't know if we should admit that right now.
Probably not. But it worked out though. It worked out well.
So actually recently it's still happening. So recently I was being Juda in Creole. Juda is like nosy. And I listen to everything my staff is saying on the phones and try to interject if I need to, the way they speak to patients and stuff. But last week we had like a plethora of phone calls and they kept saying, no, this is not the podiatrist's office. This is the internist's office. I'm like, why they keep saying that? Why? So I do a Google search. And I do a Google search on your name and my phone number pops up on your Google page. So I had to actually contact, and it's interesting because I tell in our course, on the Llama course, I have a course on marketing that actually tells providers that they need to go on Google, make sure their stuff is updated because who knows what they're doing online. So it can cause mass confusion. So now you're in Spring Hill. It's been, couple of years, and if we can, I want to kind of talk about some personal stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Before we delve into the medical, because I think you went through some traumas a couple of years after I met you with your first son, who was preemie.
Yeah. He was born 3 months early. We were expecting him in November, and while we were vacationing in New York, he decided to make an appearance. So we ended up having to stay there for a few months. And while I was working in Spring Hill, so I was flying back and forth while he was in the hospital. I mean, they kept him there for 3 months. That was that was crazy. That was crazy.
Yeah, I remember those times.
Yeah, it was rough.
How did you cope with that?
Oh, man, I'm going to tell you, it was hard because it was like first time, becoming a parent and, there are no books, no instruction manuals and this stuff. So, and no one I know ever went through that. So it was mind boggling. I think I even went through some depression because it was just like, I didn't know. And not just what was happening in terms of him being born early, but also what the long-term consequences would be for someone born in that type of predicament. I mean, with those type of disabilities from the beginning.
Yeah.
But I do remember having a conversation with a very good friend of mine who actually said something that I kept for forever till this day. He said, nice and, nothing crazy, nothing, hey, I'm sorry, nothing, the typical things that people would come and tell you, that, oh, I feel bad for you, oh, blah, blah, blah. But in the meantime, that don't wish that on themselves at all. So his friend of mine just said, one thing you should keep in mind is that God never gives you more than you can handle. It was a quote from Job's, and I was like, really? Wow. So I kept that for forever. And honestly, that's how I was able to deal with it. I just kept thinking to myself, okay, you're right. God is not giving me more than I can handle. So that means I should be able to handle this. So just plugged away one day at a time. Went through countless sessions of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, countless appointments with the ophthalmologist. I mean, it was just crazy. Didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I just kept marching through because in the back of my head, I'm like, you know what? God is definitely not giving me more than I can handle. So that means I definitely can handle this. So I don't know, for those of you guys who may be wondering who this friend was, his name is Jude-Farley Pierre.
Yeah.
So I never forgot that. That stayed with me for forever. And every time I go through any type of adversity, I just kind of recall that conversation, and it definitely does get me through a lot of things.
Yeah. And I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
And seeing Nemo, I mean, if I can say his name, I'm gonna call him out now.
Yeah, absolutely.
The guy is what, 200 pounds.
Oh God, yeah.
Full, solid muscle, thriving in college.
Absolutely.
And he's
so
happy to see that.
Absolutely, yeah. He's far exceeded anything that the doctors and all the specialists even thought about. I mean, because the scary part was when he was born, they'd tell us, hey, you know what? Every day was a small victory. But they said, don't get excited because he may not be able to see. Oh, he may not be able to walk. Oh, he may not be able to hear. He may not be able to talk. I mean, every day was, okay, he passed the hearing test. Yay. You celebrate for like just a few minutes and then you're on to the next one. And is he going to be able to see? Is he going to be able to walk? So seeing him now, awesome. It's just like amazing. Yeah. I mean, the kid's almost 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. Plays football, soccer, solid muscle, smart as a whip, lazy but smart.
Oh, don't you can't call him out like that. Come on, man. I'm sticking up for you, Nemo.
He's not that lazy. He's not that lazy. But hey, listen, you know what? You're right. He's not lazy. He plays instruments. He plays the cellos, classical cellist. He speaks 3 languages. So he's always been a good kid, and he still is till this day. Yeah. Having his best life at Florida State, and so we'll see what happens.
Cool. And you got 2 more after that too. And God bless you with
2 more.
That, so.
And honestly, again, I'm gonna have to go back to this friend of mine who talked me into having more kids, which is ridiculous. Because at the time, we both had 1 kid, and I thought it was great, and then all of a sudden he decided to have another kid. It's like, well, hey, listen, you need to have one too. I'm like, really? Is this how we're going to do this? We're going to match pair for pair. So, I ended up having a beautiful daughter named Jude-Farley Pierre, who happens to be my good friend's goddaughter. Obviously, it was only fitting because he played such an instrumental part in my life and getting me through a lot of difficult times. So it was. But you did
the work, man. You did the work. So
yeah, but sometimes it's good to have someone point out the road. I mean, hey, it's good. It's a good
deal. So you're a podiatrist.
Yes,
sir.
I
know and you had to explain to me that there's a difference between podiatry and podiatric surgeon. So you're going to have to explain to our audience, for those who don't really know. So is the schooling different, or what's the difference between a podiatrist, podiatric surgeon, or an orthopedic surgeon that does foot surgery?
Okay, so let's start with the orthopedic surgeons. So orthopedic surgeons are basically someone who went through a traditional allopathic School of Medicine or an osteopathic school of medicine, and they specialize in orthopedic surgery. And they're able to work on different parts of the body, mostly involving bones. Some orthopedic surgeons specialize in backs, some specialize in hips, knees, some actually specialize in foot and ankle as well. Podiatrists, now, again, I'm going to be, like dating myself, and I'm not that old, but still. When I went to podiatry school, way back when, there was a difference because, so you can go through podiatry school, which is a 4-year program after you've had your bachelor's degree as a science, and then you go on to do a residency program. So back then, the residency program was somewhat varied. So there are some podiatrists who only did what's called a primary podiatric medicine residency, where they do mostly routine functions, diabetic nail care, and so forth. There are those who did a podiatric orthopedic residency, and those involve mostly bracing, orthotics, and even sports therapy. And a lot of them end up working with sports teams, recommending shoes, orthotics, and so forth. And then there was the podiatric surgical residency. So now everyone could choose which one of those they would go into, and that would obviously determine where you end up and what your practice basically consists of. So I did the latter, which was the podiatric surgical residency. Therefore, I became a podiatric surgeon, as opposed to my sisters who chose to do a podiatric primary medicine residency and therefore did not do much surgery. I mean, you can still do surgery, but you're not board certified. That's what happens.
So what did you see yourself doing after the podiatric surgical residency? Were you going to stay in New York? Were you going to travel? Were you actually looking to come down to Florida, or what?
Well, no, actually that's another funny story. So I don't even know if I should admit this, but I was quite disillusioned with the field of podiatry, because you have to understand, when I finished, I was in New York. So there weren't that many positions open to people that looked like me. So a lot of them were open to people who already had a parent who was in the field, and therefore those positions were passed down to them. So you had to fight in order to at least be recognized or shine a little bit. So if you weren't at the top of your class, you probably weren't going to get noticed. And I've had, people just say, hey, you're not going to make it, at least not in New York anyway. So that disillusioned me just a lot. And then, so I thought about just quitting. And then a friend of mine who actually graduated with me, she's a podiatric surgeon over in Pennsylvania. She said, no, I'm not going to let you give up. We went through too much, studied too hard. No, we're not doing this. So we did one final year residency with one of our mentors, Dr. Amelia Goes. And I learned different things. We did a lot of trauma rotations. So I found that I actually liked limb salvaging. I liked cutting people, so to speak, legally, of course. I liked the idea of putting things back together or taking things off that didn't belong there or no longer viable, basically. So I thought about surgery. I thought it was a good field to go into because you can make a drastic difference in the outcome of someone's life. So I wanted to start practicing in New York, but 9/11 happened. So where I did my surgical residency was downtown Manhattan. The hospital is actually called NYU Downtown. It was one of the most sought-after surgical residency programs because of its location, number one. So it's literally right there, ground zero. We could see planes actually crashing into the buildings. Our hospital, as well as another hospital down there, Gouverneur, we saw the majority of the traumas that occurred from that tragedy. So we volunteered. We were treating dogs and firemen, police officers. I mean, it was just chaos, trauma everywhere, amputations, limb loss, all sorts of things. And
I didn't realize that.
It was a tough time to. And I was a resident, and I was literally graduating. I was done. So the only thing I had to do was start applying Medicare number, license, instead of going from the resident license to regular license. So all that stuff got frozen and nothing. Mm-hmm. New York shut down, the government shut down. Every application, everything, a piece of mail was being sprayed down for anthrax. It was nothing. Couldn't do anything. So I was stuck after graduation, after finishing up my residency and not knowing how I'm going to work and where I'm going to work. So I started Googling and started looking around and found that Florida was one of the few states that had reciprocity, meaning whatever you accomplished in New York, they would recognize, and all you had to do was just pay. You didn't have to take another exam. You didn't have to jump through hoops. It was just pay your money, here's your license, and that's it.
Okay. So, I mean, you struck me as a almost a miracle worker on some of my patients. So I know that it's probably some of the experiences that you had in New York, but we had a patient, Dr. Singh and I, and we were just starting out and growing the practice. And we had a patient that had a wound, I think, for about a year. I won't say his name, but mm-hmm. I think you remember him. He had charcot joint. He, heavy guy. So it was very hard to get his weight off his foot. And you came along, and I think within 3 months, the wound was healed. Yeah. And I'm like, what is this? Who are you? And so from that point on, because you were right next door to me in our marketing ploy, I would just send patients to Jude, and he'd take care of the wounds, or he'd come over to the office. So that really, really helped us in the managed care world, because, our idea is to manage the whole patient. Right. And make sure that they don't go to the hospital, that they don't get expensive drugs and medications and expensive surgeries that may not work. So what had been your managed care experience prior to joining us, and how has it been since then?
Okay. So that's easy. My, prior managed care experience was zilch, zero, nothing. Never even heard of the word. I had no idea what that was at all. I knew Medicare, Medicaid, and, some things in between, and that's it. So I was completely taken aback by this whole managed care system, and it took a while for me to actually understand it. So Dr. Singh, through some exhaustive late night sessions, tried to drill it into my head how this system is supposed to work. And then, of course, you hear a lot of stories from other outside doctors and colleagues of mine as well. And everyone hated managed care because, you don't get paid. They expect you to work like a dog, and they pay you pennies on the dollar. And so I was starting to become a little jaded and like, oh, God, this is probably not the best thing for me. So being part of a group like Access Healthcare started to open up my eyes and give me a new perspective on how patients should be treated. So I know I've heard this before, and this is from school, from podiatry school, where they tell you, you need to understand that a patient's feet don't walk in by themselves. They're attached to a body. So you have to be mindful of the fact that that person has issues, systemic issues that may contribute to their foot problems. And so you have to be a doctor. You're not a pedicurist. You're not a nail technician. You're a physician, and you need to treat the patients accordingly. So my approach then became like that. I basically started asking more questions. I started looking at the patient as a whole, and therefore I was able to coordinate the care with my colleagues, such as yourself, in order to, attain reasonable and desirable goals. And as far as wound care, so I fell in love with wound care early on, and I loved it. I have to thank Dr. Trainer, who had a huge impact on my life. She was a PhD, an RN with a PhD in wound care. I remember everyone hated going to wound care clinic because it smelled so bad. It was so much work having to put on those Una boots every week. Horrible. But man, I thrived on that, and I loved it. So I made up my mind. I didn't even bother doing, I was board eligible for surgery. I decided to take my boards in limb salvaging and diabetic foot ulcers management instead. So now I'm a wound care board certified podiatric physician who also does surgery. So in that capacity, I'm able to do a lot of things that your traditional wound care specialist can't, which is not just manage the wound, but I can also manage the underlying osseous issues that are causing the wounds. Like, if someone has a metatarsal that's just too pronounced or prominent, I can alleviate that problem by doing certain surgical procedures that can take care of that, and as well as taking care of the wound forever, rather than just put them in a pair of shoes.
Yeah. So you've niched out even the podiatry practice.
Absolutely.
In terms of what you do. What are your other colleagues doing? Are they, because I know that, not everyone is doing this. Right. Or how are other colleagues managing their practices? I know some are going to nursing homes, assisted livings. How do they land these jobs and these positions? How do they practice?
So I noticed a lot of the podiatrists in our area specifically. So the majority of them, they did a lot of nursing homes, which I also did in the beginning as well, because again, it's one of those like, oh, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. So I did it. Until I was like, no, there has to be a better way. So that's when I decided to niche out. Again, with Dr. Singh's help, it was kind of easy to say, hey, pick out what you think you're good at and then just do that. Other guys, I noticed they do a lot of primary care stuff. Like they'll hire podiatric assistants, which is someone that they train to do a lot of the basic functions like nail care, callus care, and things of that nature. So you have 5 or 6 of those girls or guys working on the patient, and you're able to, I guess, it's kind of like networking. You have 5 or 6 people doing the work, and then you just go in and you provide a certain amount of care, but they're working under you. So that's how they're able to do some of the things that they do. Otherwise, it's impossible to make a good living because it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game.
Yeah. So, and it's mostly fee for service, right?
Yes, mostly fee for service.
So, but I also heard you speak about contracts, and some HMOs or some managed care organizations will give podiatry groups contracts. Right. Are they capitated contracts or are they fee for service contracts as well?
So now there are certain podiatry groups who have been here in existence for quite some time in the Tampa Bay area, and they're able to form what you call an IPA, and therefore compete for some of the capitated contracts that some of the managed care plans had to offer. Now, again, business savvy, that's fine because it serves your group. You go in, you lowball basically. You offer the best price you think the insurance company is going to allow, and then they give you the contract, and it's a numbers game. Again, you're like, okay, I'm going to be the only group to see all of these members, therefore it's going to be fine. Now, when the managed care plans grow, and therefore you don't have a presence in this county and the managed care plan's there, then you subcontract with another podiatrist like myself, for instance. You give them a fee-for-service contract. You're able to, so that they can see the patient, but basically underneath your capitated contract. So you send in a claim, and they'll pay you based on the contract that you sign with them. And that contract's usually for a set amount based on a certain amount of codes that they allow, which is actually a really good system because it definitely cuts out a lot of the menial nonsense that you have to deal with the traditional Medicare plan, which is modifiers and different codes. You know what I mean? When you have a managed care plan, it's so much easier because you have X amount of codes, this is how much you get paid. Boom. It's very easy. You submit your claim, you get paid. That's it.
So what Jude is talking about is really something that I've been trying to hone in on, the Money Tree series that I started a couple of weeks ago. And he's describing IPA contracting. So if you take a look at the Money Tree series, there's a couple of series already out there. I invite you, the listeners, to actually re-listen to those episodes, especially the one about the IPA and the MSOs, because that will kind of help you understand what we're talking about here in that Money Tree series. So that was a plug to another series episode. So.
And it all ties in.
It all ties in. And that's what we're trying to do here to help physicians understand this stuff, because we're definitely not taught this stuff in medical school or residency.
No, not at all. Never even heard of it, honestly.
Yeah. So one thing I want to touch on is as you grew, you got busier, and you invited your sister to be part of your practice. How was that?
Yeah, that was interesting. So as we grew, and it got to a point where, again, being part of a group such as Access allowed me to get very busy very quickly because I had a tremendous amount of support from my colleagues as far as referrals are concerned. It didn't hurt things that I was the only podiatrist in the group, so it was kind of easy. Oh, wow, you have a foot problem? Boom. Instead of taking care of it myself now, we have someone who can do it for you. So that it was easy. So I stayed very busy. We tried hiring different podiatrists over time, and things just never actually worked out because, again, it's sad to say, but, you know, when you go to med school, podiatry school, dental school, chiropractic school, you're just not taught the business of it. So a lot of them came in with unrealistic expectations. They thought things were the exact same as when they were in residency. Not a clue as to how it is to manage a practice, let alone a managed care practice. It's just not that black and white. There are so many different variables that you have to take into account. It's not hard once you actually commit yourself to learning it. Once you learn the system, it's fairly easy. It literally it runs by itself, but you have to understand it in order to do it. And needless to say, we went through at least a couple. It didn't work out. And at the time, I think my sisters were in New York and they were getting a little tired of the politics and the hustle and bustle of New York City. Therefore, they were looking to relocate. So I told them, hey, listen, you know, we have a growing practice here. Why don't you bring your expertise down to Florida if you want to, and we can see if it works. So, you know, 5 years in, she's still there. It's a work in progress. Working with family is never easy, but you have to kind of find a way to do it. It's definitely a lot more challenging than I'd expect before, but it's still there. You know, there are pros and cons. I mean, the pros are good in the fact that you can actually pull her aside and say, hey, listen, this is not working, or you need to do something different, because you can't do that with someone who's not related to you, because that person will take offense quickly as far as like, whoa, you're trying to tell me how to practice. No, but if it's coming from a sibling, it's a little bit easier to swallow. Yeah.
Well, you've got a big heart.
I guess so. Yeah, I suppose we could say that.
So what would you tell the younger version of you, now that you've done this for 20 plus years, about practicing podiatry or even practicing medicine? What would you tell them that you would have done differently?
Oh, wow. There's so many things I would tell my younger self. Let me see. The first thing I would tell my younger self is probably don't do it. Don't go to med school.
Don't say that. Don't
become a DJ. You can make more money in less time. But if you absolutely have to do it, I'd say...
Because you want to do it. Because that's what I say.
Because you want to do it.
Because you have the heart to do it.
I would say you need to learn everything, not just the stuff they teach you in school, but you also need to learn the business of it. You need to actually know how to run a business, because at the end of the day, yes, we're taking care of patients, but it's still a business. And if you don't have that type of mentality, you're not going to make it for very long. You're going to burn out quickly, because you have to learn how to work smart, not just hard. Working hard is absolute, because that's going to happen regardless. But you also have to learn how to work smart.
That's great advice. That's great advice. And that's what we're trying to teach in the Practice Impossible podcast. So how do we reach you if someone wanted to talk more about you, or if there's a podiatrist that is looking to join the community?
Oh, absolutely.
How can we
just
reach you?
Email me. Okay. I'm extremely accessible. I'm very easygoing. I love to teach, especially after learning so much over the past 20 years from a number of people. I mean, some of the stuff that I've learned, I know for sure that no one's teaching that. As a matter of fact, we have podiatry residents at Oak Hill now, and when I round with them, it's tough to kind of see that things have changed to some degree, because I remember when we were talking about previously about the different types of podiatry residencies that they had, and therefore that would honestly give you a podiatrist versus a podiatric surgeon. Now, podiatry, in its, the wisdom, decided that makes no sense. It's about time. So now they decided to make it a 3-year residency for podiatry, period. And it includes surgery. So everyone who comes out is literally a podiatric surgeon. So
okay.
There's no different sets of podiatrists, because it became too difficult in hospitals, because you have podiatrists on call and something comes into the ER and you call that podiatrist. It's like, oh, I don't do that. That doesn't make any sense. So now everyone's trained the exact same way, which is, thank you, God, that someone did that. So, but talking to the residents, you can still see where there's a huge lack of teaching. They're not learning, or they're not being taught, rather, the things that they really do need to learn. So I find myself teaching them those things, like little things, like how to carefully dissect, a chart, and how to see the patient in a different way, how to manage a patient different. You don't just go and start ordering prealbumin levels on every patient, because that's an expensive test that's unnecessary. What I mean? You need to learn not to order an MRI on every single person who has a wound, because it's completely unnecessary. So things like that, you have to, sad to say, but you have to kind of unteach them what they learned. So it's a challenge, but I'm up for it. I love it. I love teaching.
We're all up for it. That's why we're here, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. And so
I wish there was someone like us back then.
Well, there were. It's just, they're in pockets. We got to make it so that it's everywhere, and that's what we need to. We need to do it, and that's what we're going to do it. We're going to do it.
I hope so. We're
going to do it.
All right.
So thank you so much for the conversation, and it's been great. And now we've got it memorialized. I think that's a term. This is going to be around for our kids to listen to, for Nemo to listen to.
I love it. I love it. It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
All right, bye.
All right, bye.